Welcome, everyone. We are so glad you are joining us. My name is Dr. Natasha Falahi, the Sensitive Doctor, and I am very excited to introduce our special guest today, Dave Markowitz. Dave helps empaths and highly sensitive people see and heal the deepest causative layers of their pain, illness, and blockage. His books include Empathopedia, Healing for Empaths and Highly Sensitive Persons, and Self-Care for the Self-Aware, a guide for highly sensitive people, empaths, intuitives, and healers. Dave helps his clients reveal their buried emotions, bring them to the surface to begin the healing process. Using specific tools and techniques designed for empaths and HSPs, he takes them through the necessary steps for self-empowerment, teaching them how to avoid emotional and energetic overwhelm. Dave, it is a pleasure to have you joining us today. Welcome.
Thanks so much. The pleasure is mine.
You do such great work with people and, provide resources and books, but I'd really love to know how you got into the work that you do. What is your story behind this?
Well, I was doing more traditional medical intuition and energy healing. And a friend of mine invited me to one of their friends' birthday parties. And I was new to Portland. I had lived in New York for 45 years, and I really didn't know anyone. I thought it was a good opportunity to meet people, forgetting that I don't drink, and realizing eventually it was a bar crawl with 7 bars in 7 hours. And at the end of that night, I tried to hail a cab, and it came out slurred. I tried to walk a straight line, and all I drank was water the entire night. And I realized, oh, wow, this is a familiar feeling. This feels like I'm drunk. This feels like college again. And I finally got in the cab, and my intuition just was loud and clear, and it said, this is what we mean by you being an empath, because so many people had been telling me that, and I just didn't want to own the word for whatever reason. And from that moment on, every new client that came to me identified as empathic or highly sensitive. So something really shifted as an end result of that night. And I had to really look at what was coming my way and really just change my approach a little bit. And fortunately, being reasonably intuitive, I was able to intuit exactly what these people needed. So instead of hearing things like I used to, oh, you have anger at your dad being held in your back, I would hear more things like you're holding your dad's anger, or you're holding your mom's grief, which was really new to me at the time, but made sense. And I just went with that, and there became numerous commonalities of many of the people that I worked with, and eventually worked its way into being a whole prevention and healing system. So I felt very blessed for that strange evening.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that that's something that a lot of us have experienced is, we get these messages from our mind or our body or from our intuition. And a lot of times it takes a while or a lot of repeat occurrences for us to really understand where it's coming from. Because like you said, it's, you were out with people and you noticed that you picked up on their energies, and this is where it started to really start to make sense for you. And I think, this happens a lot for empaths where they absorb energy, and that often leads to suffering or even pain or illness. So what are things and ways that empaths can really start to understand when they're absorbing these energies, but it's actually leading to problems in themselves? What are ways that they can learn to heal that?
Well, the energies that we've absorbed from other people need to be given back to who it belongs to. And when I first heard this, I thought, oh, no way. So just for example, no way am I going to give grief back to my mother. She's got enough, right? And over time and through Spirit's consistent beckoning, I realized that it's really hers to deal with. And for me to hang on to it is really kind of a superhero complex that's not really needed. It's very egoic and very old. And it may have served me when I was younger. It may have given me some form of connection with her that I felt was necessary at that time. But as time went on, and certainly at this time, I became much more aware that she needs what's hers. And it's actually a win-win to give it back to her as opposed to me carrying it. It's sort of like me walking someone else's soul path. Mm. And it's an end result of over responsibility and improper or lack of tools to really maintain a sense of self in the face of oncoming energy. Mm. So I had to really deepen my awareness that grief is actually a good thing. It's how the body heals any kind of loss. And if I look at it that way, it was a lot easier to give it back to her. And through processes that came again intuitively, I was able to do that. I felt much lighter, and she didn't notice any difference. And I didn't notice any difference in her. And when I meditated on that, I heard that what's really heavy for myself in this example, at least, is a proverbial drop in the bucket for her, because it's hers to deal with. It's extra weighty, if that's the right word, in myself, or extra burdensome for me to carry that. And many of the people I've been working with over the last 10 years, give or take, I've been doing energy healing for about 2.5 decades, but mostly with empaths the last 10 years, I was able to see and then share with them that whatever their pain was, whatever their illness was, diagnosable or otherwise, if there's an element of absorbed energy, it really makes sense. And it's actually the healthiest, best choice for everyone involved to give it back to them. And of course, it's done metaphysically. You don't have to call the person and say, hey, would you like your grief back? You might get some strange looks, some strange responses, or you might even hear, of course, why would I want you to carry mine? So it's done metaphysically. I take people through the process. And that's really important to me, is to give people a real tangible, visceral experience of what we're talking about. Reality is, we can talk about it all day long, but until someone has a real experience, it's just knowledge at that point. It's not really wisdom. It's not felt. It's not really getting to a deeper level. And the additional, the beauty of that is they can get a real sense that holding energy from other people is not in their best interest. So in other words, I can tell them that time and time again. I have 2 books about it, but in a 15-minute example, if I take someone through the process and they give back something that's not theirs, and they immediately feel a huge shift, an openness, a connectedness, a groundedness, a relaxation, all kinds of things can really happen as we free ourselves from those burdens of other people's energies.
Why do you think it is that a lot of empaths, highly sensitive people have that superhero complex? Or sometimes it's, referred more to as a caretaking complex, where they want to dive in, solve other people's problems, and, really anticipate, or when they feel things, they want to fix it. And a lot of them have an aversion to the idea of self-care. The word self or ego is, a bad word for them, this kind of selfishness. Why do you think that has happened for people who are really sensitive or empathic? That they're always focusing on fixing things for other people, and like you said, like taking on other burdens, but they're really averse to stuff that feels quote unquote selfish.
Yeah. Okay. So what I was shown in meditations, a great question, by the way, is that when we're really young, we're experiencing all different types of things in our family of origin or who's ever raising us. And as sensitive kids, we can feel what's happening with other people, sometimes on a very deep level. And what I was shown was that anything that we did, consciously or otherwise, as a coping mechanism, if it was met with any kind of positive reinforcement, the ego then becomes identified with that action. So just for a random example, I used to sing Beatles songs for my grandma when I was about 5, maybe 6 years old. And everyone said, oh, how cute, how wonderful. And I got this complex, that's not the right word, but I got this idea that it was my job to keep grandma happy, right? So, and each time I did that, grandma would lighten up, the whole room would lighten up. So I got this real self-serving idea that who I'm being and what I'm doing affects other people. And as we get older, we see that really clearly. If you walk into a room or approach someone and call them a name, or you're very loving or whatever it is, you affect other people. And what I noticed was, as an end result of that, we get this identification as being maybe the over caretaker or the over responsible one. And we get rewards for it. We get some kind of accolade for it. And so we continue to do so. And of course, it's all subconscious, especially when we get older. So I think a lot of the people, well, definitely the people that I've worked with have been the helpers, the caretakers, the nurturers, the peacemakers. And there's nothing wrong with that per se, but when it's done from a place of this is what I need to do for me to feel something or to avoid feeling something I don't want to feel, it's really coming from a weaker place as opposed to coming from a place of unconditional love and compassion, which of course are the highest vibrations. So it is a habit that needs to be stopped. Okay, there are processes again for that. And the other thing that you mentioned in that question, which I thought was great, was why do we feel it's our job, or what is the negative aspects of self-care? And I think a lot of that is cultural. We learn really early on it's better to give than to receive. And that sort of sounds lofty, but what it really becomes is martyrial. You become a martyr for everyone else's stuff. And we get burdened and tired and sick. And, just like the airplane analogy, we've all heard this one, right? Put the mask on first and help other people. Self-care has to be done. So it requires a different mindset. The funny thing about better to give than to receive is it's bad math. I mean, just left brain logically, it doesn't make any sense. I think it was probably, invented by some really lazy guy who, who just convinced people, oh, I would like to be served, so it's your job. And and it's unfortunate, but it's part of the awakening that I think we're all part of, that we do have to do self-care, not at the expense of others, but along with. Whereas for many people I've worked with, self-care is secondary, tertiary, or way down the list, and sometimes doesn't even happen. So it requires a different mindset.
Yeah, I think sometimes as empaths and sensitive people start to learn how to set up these healthy boundaries and learn how to take care of themselves, I think some of them worry that their personalities might change, that they might become less caring people and less compassionate. And I think there's a fear sometimes in one, like you were talking about, have we over identified with that idea of being the, provider of joy, or the caretaker, or somebody who fixes the peacemaker in that situation, and what part of that actually are inherent strengths we have. So I have heard from people, clients that I've worked with too, that they're sort of afraid of taking those first steps of self-care because they think that they're going to become less compassionate, or less empathetic towards other people, and to them that's kind of a negative quality. So what would you say to people who are worried that their personalities are going to change if they don't always take care of other people, and they're going to turn into somebody that they don't want to be?
Yeah. I think the phrase that really wraps that up well for myself is, we're not asking anyone to love less or to care less. We're actually inviting people to love better and to care better. So it is an evolution. It's not that you just stop caring about people. That's in your makeup. That's just never going to go away, hopefully, right? But when we do it better, meaning how can I be in service, but ideally from a place of non-attachment, I think that attachment is part of what drains us. So if we're really open, really listening, really caring, and or doing things for others from that loving, open, compassionate space, you can still be the nurturer, the caretaker. You don't have to change jobs. I mean, if you want to, sure, uh, but you just do it better with more quality and more awareness of who we are, and also how we affect others. As you do your growth, we become more in tune with that. So it's a understandable and, like you said, very common fear, but ultimately something to be worked through. And it's, a lot of it has to happen energetically. Like we're saying before, you can talk about it, you can use the acronym false evidence appearing real. That's a very left brain linear approach. So I like to work with the energetics of it and really see what's behind it. What's the fear? And the fear typically might be, if I don't do this, who will I be? So when we really process that emotion or that fear energetically, that becomes cleared. And then we just kind of step into, very organically, this higher vibration, even more loving, more compassionate, certainly better loving, better compassionate person. So anyone listening, you can keep your jobs. Okay, don't worry about it. You just do a better version.
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it. It's not that love or care is limited. So if you start giving it to yourself, it's not like you're taking it away from your loved ones or the world or your purpose. It actually builds upon itself from this very abundant giving place. And I think that that's a concept that if people really started to embrace and understand, and less scarcity around giving themselves that kind of love and care, knowing that that allows them to show up bigger in the world and allows them to love and care bigger in the world as well. And you talk about this idea of a sacred container to go, do healing. So what is that sacred container? What does that mean? What's the value of it, and why is it necessary for true healing?
If we're looking to address some really deep-rooted causal events or traumas, energies, etc., the mind has its own way of protecting us from going there. And without a sacred container, that mind pretty much controls the show. It's very rare, at least for the people that I work with, including myself, to just sit down and say, okay, let me access what it felt like when I was 2 years old. Um, it's scary, and it should be. And there's a reason why it's been buried. So in a sacred container, when someone is witnessing someone else, there is, I think, it's so beyond words. It's so magical. I see it all the time that when we can feel safe enough because someone else is holding the space, we can then access those parts of ourselves. And for many people, our left brains kind of get the best of us. They say, okay, I have all the tools. I know how to do this. I'm just going to sit down and do it. And then we do something and maybe have a small shift, and then we're like, yay, great, I can do this. But the difference is almost night and day when working with someone else, because other people can see what's going on within ourselves. I remember a long time ago, my teacher said, we all have blinders on. He put his hands like this. And he said, we can see over here, but over here we can't. We need other people to help us see what we're doing, how we're being. And the mind doesn't want to go to these spots over here very easily. So the sacred container is one of unconditional love, true compassion, and like we mentioned just a few moments ago, a non-attachment. If there's an attachment, so if I'm the practitioner and let's just say Mary is the client, if I'm attached to Mary's outcome, she's going to feel that on some level. It means that something in me is needing her to experience something for me to have a specific feeling or reaction or even sense of self-worth. In a place of non-attachment, what I found is less Dave in the way and much more source energy.
Mm.
And from a place of being held by source energy, it just makes sense. I mean, how could you not go deeper? I heard someone say that they did some research on this. Now, I don't know how it was done. I don't know how it was quantified. It seems kind of bizarre, but from my left brain perspective anyway. But she said that in a sacred container, people can go up to 11 times deeper than they can on their own.
Mm.
So even if that's not the accurate number, and even if it's just double, it's still a lot. And I think that's the way you get the real results, when people feel safe enough. And I know that when I feel safe, when I'm the client, then something very different happens. And if I feel safe to say what I need, I'll give you what I think is a funny example. I was in this group once, and I just had some stuff that I just needed to process. And this group tried its best to create a safe container where everything goes: your fears, your thoughts, your sadness, etc. So I said, I'm going through some stuff, everyone. I would just like to share what it is. And I'm going to ask everyone at the end of each sentence, all at the same time, out loud, scream out, that sucks. So I would just talk about X, and they'd say, that sucks. And I would talk about Y, and they say, that sucks. And I did it for a few minutes, and I felt so seen and so heard. And they're all laughing, and I'm even laughing. It completely changed the energy in my body and just purged all that negativity in just a few minutes, because it was a safe enough container for me to share what I needed, for them to be happy to do it, and just to create this beautiful experience. And even in a one-on-one, if, like we said earlier, if I'm in a place of unconditional love and non-attachment, clients are going to have a much better experience. So safe container to me is primary. I mean, without that, really not a lot is going to happen. in my experience anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point you bring up about healing too, is that you said when everybody's yelling, that sucks, you really felt seen, you felt heard, and kind of also maybe validated in who you really are instead of having to put on a show or a mask or do things that you should be doing. And I think that's such an important thing to recognize, that if we are not experiencing that in our daily life or in our households or at work or anywhere, it makes it really hard for us to start to have those healing experiences. So in these sacred containers, people are able, even for that period of time, even if it's an hour session or 15 minutes or a weekend retreat, for that period of time, bringing that presence to who you really are, and really understanding that when a person is seen and validated for who they truly are, their essence, that's where that innate healing, like you said, from the source energy, really starts to channel through them. And I think that that's such a important concept. And another thing that I keep hearing you bring up is this idea of left brain and right brain. And so tell our viewers and our listeners a little bit how these hemispheres of the brain are related to how we experience things in the world, or how we go about healing processes too.
Happy to do that, but I just want to touch upon what you said just prior to that, which was being in a space of unconditional love for a client or for anyone creates a new level of trust. And that is just so important. I invite all my clients to just share whatever's true with that for them. Even if they have to yell at me, I'm open to it. If they need to scream or cry, I have clients who start singing sometimes when they feel releases. So I welcome every bit of everyone else. And it's just as far as left brain, right brain. Left brain is more linear, the one that wants to figure things out. And the right brain is more associated with creativity, or really in the empath strength. And without going too much into the, all the brain parts, we need both, right? They work in conjunction. And actually reminds me to, maybe it's a good introduction to this other part that says, if we're trying to figure something out, oftentimes we push it away. The left brain has amazing logical linear capacities and is very necessary to getting things done, obviously. But when it comes to healing, it's the last thing you want in control, because it doesn't want you to access those deeper layers. And as soon as I hear a client say, I've been trying to figure this out, I know that's the issue. So I create that container of trust and compassion. And a lot of times, certainly I'm able to intuit what's happening with people, but I think it's even more powerful if I can create a safe enough space to allow them to intuit what's going on for them, even if they're not intuitive, because those energies expand so much in that sacred container. Then they can really feel and get into the body out of the left brain and get into the body, because that's where the juice of healing really is. It's important to understand things, obviously, but the deeper healing is much more visceral, typically in the torso. If a chakra is blocked, sure, anyone can open up a chakra or do energy work, but what created the closure to begin with? And that's where I like to go. And again, it doesn't really happen from the left brain. So it's all intuitive based. All my work is intuitive based. I've been doing this for 2.5 decades, channeling source, and I can't even imagine where I'd be without it. I'd probably have my old job of retail or something still, which wasn't fun, but
Yeah, definitely. And the way you talk about the brains, in terms of the left brain and the right brain, they always work together, but there's strengths in both sides, right? And generally, empaths and intuitive people have a lot more activity and a lot more strength inherently in their right brain. And that's correlated with that bigger picture thinking. And, I know that there's a lot of sayings going around, or memes or things that people will see, where it always says that healing is not linear. It's not a path where you're just going along like that. And so the fact that the left brain is pretty linear thinking is also speaking to the fact that that's not really the place that you need to access to get that really deep healing. And the way I like to think of it too, that I often refer to in clients, is this idea of that yin yang energy, and how there's a little bit of all of that in everybody. But the people who are really approaching their healing with this strong yang energy, which is very logical, analytical, let's do things, let's make protocols and kind of take action, if they're not balancing that with the yin side of healing, which is intuitive. It has wisdom, it has a lot of flow and receptiveness, like receiving healing as well, then that's a lot of times where they're blocked. So, you talk about that in terms of right brain healing. So, what are some of those tools you use with that right brain approach that's a lot more intuitive? How do people access that if they've never had that experience before, if they've always been trying to figure things out or, following those steps to achieve healing?
Yeah, great. It's a great question and a great inquiry and very common. So a lot of times we have repressed memories, repressed energies, emotions that create pain and illness. And the left brain says, if I can just do blank, I'll understand what that is. I'll understand what caused it. I'll know what to do about it. And it's, not so easy to just turn the left brain off. But again, in that sacred container, it's a lot easier to access the intuition. And a lot of it's a felt sense. It's bringing the awareness into the body, seeing what it's talking about. The interesting thing with this to me is, one of the interesting things at least, is that a lot of times we try to talk to our emotions. We try to talk ourselves out of feeling grief, anger, and fear. And that right brain, that emotional center within us, doesn't really care about words. It's got the linear capacity of an infant. So you're not going to have a real deep conversation with an infant, but they can pick up on your energy. The same thing is true when we're trying to heal. We can't just convince ourselves, oh, just stop absorbing energy from other people. You can't just say, well, just stop being upset about this. That is really repression, denial, if not bypassing. So the invitation is to use the left brain to set an intention, but also to allow the deeper truth to emerge through processes. And then everyone's got different ways of doing this. Some people can get to that place through movement, like yoga, for example, or qigong, sometimes through breath work. And what I've found is the people that come to me are really tired of using the left brain. They're realizing that it's got its place, but it's not getting them what they want. So they're a little bit more perhaps willing to go to that scarier place. I've had a lot of people of late just say, bring it, bring it, bring it. So we go right to those deeper initial wounds. So they're pretty on board already, partly because they're just frustrated with all the rationalizations and bypassing that are very common. And not to judge that, because I understand it. And if I understand that's my client's way of coping with certain pain, I'm not going to judge that. I've certainly done it myself. I think we've all done it. But to just acknowledge it, like you said earlier, the validation, acknowledge and validate someone's fears and even left brain logic, reason that wants to figure things out. It's interestingly, the process that I do is very linear. It is kind of a straight line, but the emotional capacity, the emotional reactions to it can be anywhere on the scale.
Awesome.
So we hold the space for all of that and getting to that root level of what's actually causing this pain and illness, what's creating that block that's creating the symptom. And I'll just expand upon that briefly if I can. We're taught from the get-go, certainly in Western culture, that pain and illness is the enemy that has to be defeated at all costs. And typically when we have that energy, it tends to cost a lot. And it's also very much in argument with what is. And things don't really shift from that place. So when we can really look at that and see, what's the truer experience here? What's going on at deepest possible level? Get past the brain, get past the ideas of what we think should and shouldn't be, and get into I say tofu and potatoes because I'm vegan. So get into tofu and potatoes of what's going on in someone's body. And how do we work with that? And how do we look at those symptoms as messages of information that's showing us what we're doing or what we could be doing or what we're doing that's not really giving us the results that we want? Then we can really listen to the messages and work with them. If we look at them as something to get rid of, you can't get rid of anything. I hear this all the time. I want to get rid of my anger. Well, good luck. And even the Dalai Lama was asked if he has anger, and he said, of course I do. I'm human. And he starts cracking up because that's what he does. So we have to recognize, at least in my experience, we're everything. We're just as much fear as we are peace, as we are love, as we are silliness. we have everything, and you can't really get rid of anything. The messages are not telling you to get rid of anything. They're telling you to integrate the imbalances. So it's really important. I think without that awareness, we're just in a place of fight.
Mm.
And growing up the son of a pharmacist, where every symptom was immediately just evaporated by taking a pill, it was quite a shift that I had to realize eventually, wow, that does work, but define work. Does it give temporary relief? Absolutely. Is it bad? No. Is it getting to the root? Absolutely not. Is it potentially making something worse? Yeah,
Mm.
because it's burying the messages that are trying to come through about what's going on in your body.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's such an important paradigm shift if people haven't already realized that, but to start to really understand that symptoms are messengers. They're not the problem themselves.
Right.
They are a communication. They're a way either for our mind, our body, our spirit to be communicating with us. So when you stifle that communication, usually the problem doesn't get better. If anything, it gets worse. It gets louder until it's screaming at you, right? So I think that's a major paradigm shift that a lot of us, especially in the Western world, grew up saying, oh, there's now a symptom and this is bad, or the pain, or this is all bad, and we want to just avoid it. And a lot of times that avoidance leads to a lifelong kind of fear-based approach towards things. So I think that's a major paradigm shift that for anybody who's listening, if they haven't really started exploring that idea of like, that's not the root cause of their problem, right? That's the communication.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of summing up the way that you approach this, both philosophically and the tools that you use, how would you say your healing system is different than others people may have heard about or experienced?
Right. Often when someone comes to me, they have a long list of things that they're dealing with, and also a long list of practitioners and modalities that they've already tried. And they're frustrated, obviously, or else they wouldn't be coming to me. So I invite them first is to acknowledge those people and those practices because it got them to this moment. And that's not a bad thing, right? So we don't want to fight our past. Again, if we fight something, we're actually giving more energy to it, and you can't get rid of it. You just recognize that was my past and it brought me to this space. So that's a major part also. The healing work I do involves integrating our own energetic blockages and or returning the blockages to who it belongs to, which alone can be very different from what a lot of people have tried. And I've heard a lot of things like, oh, just give it back to the universe. It knows what to do. And while that might be true, that's not really heeding the message. It's kind of an expensive aspirin because you're not really acknowledging and working with that root level issue. So it might work, but it's typically short term. So I try to do things to get to the root for more permanent chance of healing. The other part that's very different, and this might be even different from many people that you've interviewed, is that I don't believe in shielding. And I know I just made a few people flinch. That's okay. Let me explain that. It's not that necessarily I don't believe in it. I understand that it has its place. But what I've seen after doing this for so long is that more typical shielding techniques actually block enough energy to give us symptoms. So ironically, we're trying to help ourselves and end up causing more problems. So when we're trying to keep energy at bay, we hear things like put yourself in a white light or in a bubble, or put up a mirror, all these different things, which make sense against the left brain, which says, oh, that makes sense. I don't want this person's negativity coming my way, so I'm going to block it. But it's the energetic equivalent of physically doing this. So keeping someone at bay with your hands out. And how long can anyone do that for? It's going to get very tiring. And everyone I've ever worked with any symptoms or fatigue, chronic or otherwise, has basically been putting up these walls for too long. Mm. And the unfortunate part of that also is we reduce our ability to connect with other people if we have a wall up all the time. And we don't really get out. We don't connect. We don't even connect with our own spiritual path or our spiritual essence within ourselves or external of selves or all of our guidance. Everything gets slowly shut down when we're in that blocking place. Partly, if you just think about it, it's fear-based. Yeah. Fear is going to have a negative effect on your body. So what I was showing years back was the exact opposite. Ways of actually opening the body, allowing everything to come in, to be able to filter it once it's in the body and release the parts that don't work for you. So at least this way you're still in the flow.
Mhm.
You can still connect with the person in front of you. Your intuitive guidance is still on fire, and you're just more vibrant overall. We'll go into this much more in the upgrade package for this summit, where we'll actually be giving people an experience in this exercise. I'll also be taking people through some of those healing processes that we spoke about earlier. So to me, it's a very different approach. And again, to me, it's much healthier. But again, do what works for you. You know, if a rare occasion you do need that wall, it's good to have it in your toolbox. But if you do it enough, it becomes a way of being. And to me, I haven't really found that to be effective.
Yeah, that's a fascinating way of describing it, because I do hear this from empaths a lot. And I know I feel the same way. The word or the idea of putting up a wall never resonated with me, because a lot of that pain and suffering comes from not being seen and not being, connected to other people, not having kind of that sense of belonging. So putting up a wall doesn't actually address what's going on. If anything, it might isolate somebody or disconnect them more. And that disconnect is often what people are feeling. So I think that that's a really poignant, concept there that you're talking about, where, yeah, and it may work for some people. And if it does, that's really fantastic. But I do hear over and over from empaths and sensitive people. And I know myself in my own experience, I've never used that tactic of putting up a wall. And, instead, you're talking about going deeper into the experience, opening up. And I love the idea that you're talking about of filtering. So instead of putting up a wall, put up a filter and let things flow through, as they serve you, and the things that don't, let them pass. And I think that's a really fantastic way for people to think about that.
Thanks. Another real quick way to look at that is I want to be more of a funnel than a sponge.
Mm.
So even if the things are coming in, a sense of over responsibility that we may have learned in the past basically says, you're walking down the street and you're kind of like, I'll take your grief, I'll take your anger, I'll take your fear. And then we digest it all. And then it becomes part of us. We wonder why we have digestive issues. Of course, there are multiple potential causes of that. So that funnel analogy to me with a filter on it, again, we'll talk about that more when we have more time in the upgrade package. And of course, it's in the books. It's just so much more in alignment, like you said, with who you really are. You are an open, nurturing, caring, beautiful person who's very heart-centered. And why would you want to hide that? And I get why someone might want to hide that, but over time, especially, it becomes problematic and potentially symptomatic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So for people who are watching or listening and really resonating with these ideas that you're sharing and the stuff we're talking about, where can they go deeper with this? Where can they learn more?
My website is probably the best way. It's my name, davemarkowitz.com. All the information on there about the books, the best-selling books, the not so best-selling books. The most recent one, called Empathopedia, really describes so much of this and so much detail that I think that's a really great place to start. People say when I'm saying that, sometimes you're talking yourself out of a sale of your old books, Dave. And it's like, I don't care, right? It's the best one. So I think Empathopedia is the best one. There's lots of blogs and free videos and more interviews, and of course, private sessions. And I love doing group work.
Mm.
Groups are just a whole different dynamic. And I do a couple different ones, real, basic ones that introduce these concepts experientially, called Healing Grief for Empaths. Makes sense. But I also do another one called Healing the Original Wound, which talks about the original wound of separation from source on the energetic level, and the separation from our moms on the physical level at birth, and how much that creates to a sense of abandonment that we often try to fill with things that don't really work. So that's why I call it the original wound. If we can address that as deeply as possible, then we're really onto something. But it's a scary place for many to go because it is so deep and it is so potentially painful. But if it's approached the right way, with love, compassion, and that sacred container that you spoke about earlier, a lot can happen. So group work, individual work, books, it's all on the website.
Awesome. So, given what we have talked about today, what is one thing that you want to leave us with that you think people can start doing today to start seeing these changes in their own life?
Mm. Probably a really simple one would be asking the question pattern versus truth before doing anything. Meaning, stop what you're doing, stop what you're about to do, and bring your awareness inward and try to feel the answer to that question. Is what I'm about to do coming from my pattern, which is typically a conditioned belief system, or is it my higher truth? And just by doing that a little bit, eventually that becomes habitual. And we start leaving those unhealthy patterns in the past by sort of rewriting the the pathways, if you will. Um, so we're always coming from our higher truth, from our guided self. And I can't say I'm an expert at it. Maybe that would be an enlightened person. I don't claim to be anywhere near that, but I know that when I ask this question, I'm much more me. I'm much more centered and grounded. And I'm not doing things to please other people any longer. It's kind of automatic at this point. I don't have to sing songs for them, which is
Awesome.
probably a good thing in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thinking pattern versus higher truth. That's, a great way for people to start implementing this. Dave, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your wisdom with us.
Of course, thank you.
What a great session with Dave Markowitz. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you soon.